Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. LibertyTalk.fm.
To Liberty with Love with Robin Koerner. It is a pleasure to have you with us. I just got back from International Students for Liberty Conference in DC. It was absolutely fantastic. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that right now because I'm really excited about the interview I'm about to do. But I do want to mention that a very exciting thing for me happened at Students for Liberty last weekend, which is that I did a launch event with the awesome Jeffrey Tucker for our new book called Beauty and Truth: Frank and Friendly Conversations in Being Human. And I'm kind of excited to say that this is a free download, this book, at fee.org. That's the Foundation of Economic Education. So check that out. I'm really excited about it. The book includes a number of conversations that many of which I've actually had on this show with Jeffrey Tucker. And you know what? Talking about economics there, the Foundation of Economic Education, we're going to be doing some economics today. Let's get right into it. Today I am speaking to the lady who literally wrote the book on public banking. In fact, she's written 12 books, and she's the founder also of the Public Banking Institute. Her name is Ellen Brown. She's a real expert who goes around the whole world talking about this topic, public banking. And the reason I want to talk about it here, apart from the fact that I love all this economicsy stuff, is that the institution of public banking can represent a huge change to the politics and economics of a society. And it is also, though, fraught, like so many things that cause huge economic changes, with political difficulties. So we're going to talk a little bit about the economics of public banking. We're going to talk about what public banking actually is, and also a little bit about the politics of it. So, Ellen, thank you so much for being with me. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robin. Great to be on your show.
Now, well, let's just start with, what is public banking? What does it mean?
Public banking would be banks that are owned by we the people. So it's public. We did have a little confusion with the name when I was first writing about it. But a public bank, of course, technically would be one that has gone public, which means it's private. But we're talking about something that's owned by the government. The profits returned to the government. It's got a mandate to serve the people. So it's a public utility.
Right, a bank as a public utility in public hands via the government. Okay, so right now all of the conservatives' heads are exploding. They're going, this sounds like a really bad idea. Why do we want to give the government all of our money and let them run banks? We see how they run the DMV. A lot of folks are also terrified about, how it looks to the horizon with respect to their healthcare. That's a huge issue. So, there's a lot of folks out there, especially in the United States, that go, that's got to be a bad idea, pretty much because it's got the word public in it. And public ownership, isn't that like a step towards communism and all of those scary things? So now, I obviously am not I guess I could say, economic progressive. I'm not a socialist. But I know that there's more to public banking than that. And that there's actually, I will stick my neck out and say, there are some reasons why public banking could represent a step toward not only, let us say, more progressive principles, but also a step towards, in some ways, more conservative, certainly fiscally conservative principles. So with that kind of framing, why is this something you advocate for? What is the benefit of a public bank, and where and when might we want to use one, and what would it be replacing?
Well, first going to the issue of whether it's socialist. our one and only model in the U.S. is the Bank of North Dakota, which is in North Dakota, which is a very conservative state. And the reason they formed this bank was that they were tired of seeing all their money go to Wall Street or going out of state. And they wanted to keep their money in their state and use it for their own purposes.
Now,
so basically, you can save if you, the government, have your own bank, you can basically save 50% on the cost of infrastructure, because on average, the cost of financing is 50% of the cost of infrastructure. Mm-hmm. You can. What they do in North Dakota is they partner with the local banks. So the local banks, the Bankers Association thinks they're great. They endorse them because the Bank of North Dakota is like a mini Fed for the state. So they actually service the banks, help the banks with liquidity, help them with capital, and then it's the small banks that are actually servicing the community. But the Bank of North Dakota is recycling the public's own money out into their own community, and the profits go back to the public.
So let's explain how this works. So the deposits in a public bank are the taxes paid, in this case, to the state. Let's use North Dakota as the example. Is that right? And so from those deposits, what then happens? The withdrawals are made by the government for projects like infrastructure projects. And the point being that because the money is already in the bank, accumulated over time, is this right, from the taxpayers, they don't have to go to Wall Street with the big bond issues and pay huge amounts of interest over time. And so all of that interest is saved. So over the long term, tax rates go down for any given amount of spending on government services and infrastructure. Have I got that right?
Right. And the hardest thing to get across to people is that banks actually create money. In fact, banks create virtually all of our money. So right now we have given that power away to banks, and we want to get it back. The colonies gave away their power to issue paper money with the Constitution, which gave it to the federal government. But the federal government didn't take it. They let all they did was issue coins, which right now are a very minuscule part of the money supply. And they let the private banks issue banknotes, and that became our paper money. And then the Federal Reserve, which we know is not the federal institution it purports to be. And so we, the people, have lost the power to issue our own money. But because when banks create loans, they actually write the sum of the loan in. The way they do it is they just write that amount in your deposit account. So they've actually created deposits, which deposits are counted in the money supply. So then that deposit, let's say you go to the bank and you take out a loan for a mortgage, and then you write a check, say it's for $500,000, then you write a check for $500,000. It goes to another bank. So the first bank creates $500,000, just writes it into your checkbook. And then when it goes into the second bank, they count that as a deposit, a new deposit. So meanwhile, that second bank may have created another mortgage in the same way, and it might find its way into the first bank. So all their books balance, but they have created this money out of nothing. And we have given them that power. So the only way we can get back the power today to create the money supply is by having a bank. And most people can't afford to own a bank, but we can do it collectively. We can do it through our local governments.
Okay, so you were talking there, Ellen, though, about the public bank doing the money creation just like any other bank. Now that's important, and actually there's a whole chapter in my book, if you can keep it, about just that. But I want to link that to what I was asking about, which is I was saying the benefit.
What's the process?
The benefit of having tax money sit in the public bank. So basically, the public. You see what I mean. We've only got a minute and a half in this segment, but do carry on, and then we'll come back.
Well, the reason that's an issue is as soon as you talk to legislators, they say, well, we don't have the money to lend because we need our revenues for our budget. But that's the point. You're not lending your revenues. You put them in the bank as deposits. You lend money equivalent to your deposits, but the deposits are always still there. You can still spend them. And the reason is banks have very cheap sources of liquidity. So if they don't have the money, they borrow it from each other at 0.5% or from the Federal Reserve at a little more than that, or they can go to the repo market and borrow it for even less. So if you are the bank, you can borrow at 0.5% instead of 5% or 12% or whatever the interest rate is, depending on what kind of bond you've got.
And the underlying thing here, of course, is any profits made on loans that are taken out at the public bank stay, as it were, the profits are held by the public. So the North Dakotans are making the profits on the loans that the other North Dakotans are getting from the North Dakotan bank. So there's a benefit in terms of accumulation of tax in the public bank and in the money creation part of it. Okay, so, wow, we've already done the first segment. We're coming up to the bumper music already. Time flies when you're having fun, and what a strange person I am to think that banking is fun. But I do. All right, we're going into the break. This is Liberty with Love, and I am Robin Koerner. This is Robin Koerner. I'm talking to Ellen Brown, the lady who wrote the book on public banking. Okay, so we've got a sense of the benefits of a public bank. If states and even cities could save, on average, 50% of what they spend, which goes to Wall Street as interest payments, basically, for big government projects, pretty much, right? I'm generalizing, but that's pretty much it. Why isn't there one in every state? Why isn't there one in every city? It seems like a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have read that governments are there, bureaucracies are there not to change the rules. Nobody had really heard about the Bank of North Dakota, I think, until I started writing about it in the fall of 2008, because I noticed that North Dakota was the only state that had escaped the credit crisis, and I happened to know that they had their own bank, but I only knew that because I'd been to a monetary reform conference and somebody brought it up. I mean, it was an obscure fact. Okay. So the way they have gotten away with this for the last 100 years is to keep a very low profile. And in fact, for example, the island state of Guernsey does this, where they just issued the money and did their infrastructure, and they've done it for 200 years. But Bill Still, who writes on this subject, went and tried to interview somebody there, and they wouldn't talk to him.
Now, what?
They don't want to talk about it because you've got to keep it under wraps, or they're going to come after you. I mean, look at Libya, for example, Gaddafi, who brazenly said he was issuing his own money. He was going to go on a gold dinar and going to all of Africa was going to be on this new money system. I mean, you don't last very long if you flaunt the system and say that you're doing something different.
Okay, let me.
So we've been.
So I just want to understand this. You said that you basically, if you have a public bank or you're running one, you have to keep your head down. What are the interests that don't want this taking off, and how do they operate? Just be clear, like, what's the mechanism of this? How is it that this can survive, but if more people knew about it, heads would roll? What's the threat? Is it really, are Wall Streeters really scared that if a bunch of states have a bank, then the profits they're going to lose from issuing bonds to states and cities is going to be so great that they really have to, kind of threaten people or states not to set up a public bank? No, I think now you could do it. I mean, they don't really even want the types of loans that a local public bank would make. They're not lending to small businesses and doing infrastructure projects in the state, with small projects. But it's just that for 200 years that we've been so brainwashed into thinking that banking works a certain way that it's very hard to break through that and come out with another theory. And the Bank of North Dakota obviously hasn't advertised for the last 100 years. They haven't gotten out there and said, well, look what we're doing. This is working much better. You all should do it. In fact, if you talk to them, they say, we're not on a campaign to help other states set up their own banks. We're busy running our own.
I mean, that.
Okay. So if you think it is more possible now, Ellen, why aren't we seeing it? I mean, why aren't we seeing it just maybe because fiscal conservatives and cash-strapped states could look to North Dakota and go, I mean, I think most people do now know that North Dakota has a public bank and that it's in quite good fiscal shape. How come it hasn't been taken up elsewhere then?
Well, there are a lot of places working on it, and we're very busy working with people who are working with their legislators. But these things just take time. You've got to overcome a lot of local laws. And there's simple things like states require, like California, where I live, requires that you post collateral equal to 110% of your deposits if you're going to take state deposits. So local banks don't even want the state deposits because what that means is like you have to basically use the money to buy enough bonds to balance out the deposits. So they're not doing you any good. You can't leverage them. A big bank does want them, or they're starting to reject those deposits too. But anyway, the big banks can use these deposits for very complicated reasons. What they do is they buy the bonds, they leave them sitting there on their books, but on their off the books maneuvers, they use them as collateral for repo loans, so they can use them in a different way.
Hold on, so I'm a bit confused here, so just let me clarify it. I was thinking that the big money for the banks or the profit, relatively big profits for the banks, is in lending money to cities and states. Now, you're talking about accepting state deposits, i.e. taxpayer deposits. Is that right? Can we separate those?
I'm just saying these are legal hurdles. For example, in Santa Fe, they've gone through all the steps. They've had a feasibility study. It's been approved. They're trying to get this bank set up. But the hurdle they're up against right now is they've got to do this 110% collateral thing. So you have the option. What you can do instead is to get a guarantee from the federal home loan banks that they'll write you a letter of credit. But to do that, you have to have a credit record. You have to show that, it's a couple of years of, I don't remember, AA or some sort of credit rating. And of course they don't, because they're a new startup bank. So now they're trying to figure out how to get around. So there are all these little rules that were basically put in place to maintain the system the way it is. So you've got to figure out how to get around those rules, and you've got to do legislation to change the rules, if you see what I mean.
What about at the state?
It's complicated.
What about at the state level, though? Because obviously any work to set up a state bank, that work is to change the law to set up a state bank. Yeah. That's what the work is. So if you've got state senators and legislators, passing the and changing the necessary laws, again, that's their job. They do that every day. So what's especially difficult?
Well, that particular was a city, so they can't change this state law.
Right.
But in California, we had a bill that passed both houses of the legislature in, I think, 2012 or 2013, and the governor didn't sign it. But sorry, I forgot what I was going to say.
You're saying that in California there was a bill to set up a state bank that was passed by both houses, but the governor didn't sign it.
Yeah, it was a bill for a feasibility study.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
just a study. So what was?
Sorry, but I've lost, right?
So the governor didn't even want to study it, and that was why.
Well, at the time, he said it was because we don't need it. It was for a blue ribbon committee, which would look really closely at things. And he said, we don't need another committee. It'll just be more money. We can do this in-house. We have a banking committee. But, of course, they never did. Nothing ever happened. And what we heard, of course, was that the big banks were opposed. But what they will say, and what they always routinely do say, is that government can't run a business, that we know what we're doing and we don't need another bank, and it'll just cost the government money, and you'll probably lose money. You'll probably get into risky loans or something like that. So, of course, we're not going to have politicians run the bank. We're going to have seasoned bankers who know what they're doing. We're not going to get into risky loans. I would say don't do any loans, but just start out buying bonds. Here's how it could work.
We've got 1 minute in this segment, so start this off and then we'll carry it on the next segment. Go ahead.
Okay. So let's say say California took $1 billion they've got $500 billion in their pension funds. Sitting there basically making bad investments. So you take $1 billion from your pension fund and you pay them 7% interest, which is what they want on a return.
Who pays? Just to be clear, what are we talking about?
The state. You're going to set up a bank.
We're going to set up a bank. We're going to put the $1 billion of pensions into the bank, and then the state is going to pay a 7% interest on that $1 billion.
That's for capital. Yeah.
Now
you take.
So now hold on. We're going into the break. So with that set up, right, we're going to come back straight to this situation, to this scenario, when we come back. All right, Ellen, hold tight. In 2011, Robin Koerner wrote the article that launched the biggest coalition for Ron Paul's presidential run, called Blue Republican. Now, Stairway Press is pleased to announce the publication of his first book, If You Can Keep It, Why We Nearly Lost It and How We Get It Back. Jeffrey Tucker, who wrote the foreword, says brilliant ideas come in effervescent packages. This is a good description of Robin Koerner's provocative work. It's a work of stunning erudition and sincerity. I also happen to agree with it. I've been struggling toward a similar thesis for a good part of my writing career, though I'm certain Robin has gone beyond even my most mature thought. His section on liberty as a realization of a civilization of love truly sweeps me away with its insight and depth. I know that time is short and that people don't read as carefully as they should, but this section deserves close study by every advocate of liberty. It will change the way you think and speak about the topic. We need this book now. Pre-order your personally signed copy of If You Can Keep It at ifyoucankeepit.us. So we're going to move straight on from where we left it at the end of the last segment, Ellen. So we've got this scenario, it's like kind of hypothetical, that we've got a public bank in a state like California. We've got $1 billion of pensions in that bank. So in this bank owned by the Californian public, and it's pension money that is going to be paid to Californians. Now, you set up the situation where the state is going to pay 7%. Now, the state is paying, that comes out of state revenue, out of taxes, right? That interest is coming.
No, I'm going to show you how you can get it out of the bank itself.
Okay.
All right. So then you take $10 billion. The Treasurer's investment pool currently has close to $70 billion in it, earning 0.5%.
Now,
almost nothing.
Let me explain what this is. The Treasurer's investment pool. So you mean This is the Treasurer of California has authority to invest $70 billion Californian dollars, and it's only earning this tiny percentage right now. So he's obviously really bad at it.
Well, they're being very conservative.
Sure.
No, actually, this treasurer is better than the last treasurer. But
okay.
So no, I like this treasurer.
Okay, fair enough.
But those are the rules. See, that's the problem. You got all these rules you got to get around. So you take this. So you take $10 billion of that money, and you pay them what they want, 0.5%. And
so you take hold on, whoa. You take $10 billion of the $70 billion, and we're paying the small amount. Interest
these are
rate.
Deposits. This is not going to be an investment. These are you're just going to deposit the money in the bank. It's like a CD.
The $70 billion. Are we talking about the $70 billion or the one? Because we started with the $1 billion. Now we're talking about 70.
Yeah.
So we're going to put the
$7 billion. $10 billion.
We're going to put $10 billion into the Californian Public Bank. Yeah. Right.
You've got to have 10% capital, 10% reserves. Yeah. You can with $1 billion, you can capitalize $10 billion in loans. So we put $10 billion in deposits out of the Treasurer's investment pool, pay them exactly what they're making now, 0.5%. So altogether, if you multiply that out, your cost of funds is going to be 7% plus 0.5 times 10 would be 0.5. So that's by 12. Let's say 12%. But you've got 10 different units here that you're lending out. If you're following me, so you've got 10 billion times. You're not.
No, I'm not. Let's go back one step at a time, because you confused me at the beginning with this $1 billion in the bank. right? So
you're going to leverage. Is the point? You're going to pay 7%.
Don't say you. Ellen. Don't say you. Tell me exactly who's doing what here. Okay, let's get we need to get the subject, verb, object right, because this is going to be completely new to most of my listeners. All right. Okay.
All right. So a bank can leverage its capital at 10 to 1.
Okay,
right?
but hold on. Stop right there, because that's just a textbook myth. As you were saying earlier, banks create money, and they don't need deposits. No bank has ever turned anybody away for a loan because we don't have 10% deposits that we can use the money multiplier on to pay your loan. It's a textbook myth, right?
No, I agree. Okay. But you're going to freak your politicians out.
No, but
I shouldn't say you're.
I'm not a politician, so
they're going to freak if you tell them you're going to lend more than you've got on deposit.
Okay, so, but just tell me how it really is.
The Bank of North Dakota lends. I think they have like a 70% loan to deposit ratio. So that's conservative. So we're going to do that. We'll be real conservative and do 7 to 10, let's say. So
what we're saying. So let me just be clear. What we're saying is this public bank isn't going to operate like all of the other banks that can and do create money out of nothing. Debt money out of nothing. This bank, the public bank, is going to be constrained.
We're going to create the money, but okay.
But we're going to put a big limit on it. We're going to put a big limit on it that is a function of the deposits. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you've got to cover when the money goes out, this is what politicians worry about. When the money leaves the bank, you do have to pull that from somewhere, and governments have been known to go right down to zero. That happened to California, for example, and I think in 2008. So where are they going to get that money if they've lent it out? But what all banks do is they borrow their liquidity from somewhere else. They borrow it from the Federal Home Loan Bank at very cheaply. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to leverage too much. You want to stay within those conservative parameters that legislators will go for.
Okay, right. So we've got basically a conservative lending bank, right? Our public bank is a conservative lending bank, right? Let's just go with that for now.
Yeah, I think all your local banks will all stay within those parameters. It's true that Wall Street, they don't. They lend like crazy. They don't worry about what. True. And your big London banks, I know they do like leverage at 100 or definitely Lehman Brothers was at 30 to 1, I think. Mm-hmm. But we've got to persuade these legislators that this is a good idea. It's going to be a moneymaker, and they're not going to lose money. Okay. So that's why I'm doing this very conservative, acceptable model. Okay, so you've got $1 billion. You're now allowed to lend $10 billion, but let's say we're going to be conservative. We're just going to lend $7 billion. Okay. You're going to cover that with $10 billion in deposits that are just going to sit there in the bank. You can, if they need them, go ahead, spend them.
Right. And these will typically be deposits from Californian taxpayers, right? From California.
Oh, well, assuming we're pulling it out of the Treasury's investment pool, these are all the rainy day funds all over the state.
Yeah, okay.
So they're including the state's own slush funds. Yep. But also from counties or anybody that wants the treasurer to manage his money for them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But this is all, my point being, though, that it's money that has been paid. It may have been invested, but originally it comes in taxes from Californians. If it's a California.
Yeah, and the investment is so low you can almost not call it. It's almost like a deposit. It's what you would get on a long-term deposit in a bank.
Yes. Okay.
That's
so there we are.
Earning. So that's the thing. You can pay them that, and you can still make a nice profit and do extremely conservative things, buy bonds with it. So if your cost of funds is going to be 1/7 of $1 billion per each of these loans, right? And then plus 0.5, I don't know what 1/7 is it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But anyway, you're going to turn a profit on this because of leverage, because of the fact that you can pay back the 7% on capital with just a fraction of each of these loans. And let's say it's a 4% bond or a 5% bond that you're buying. You're making, let's say it's 5% bond. So you're making 7 times 5, you're making 35%. You're paying 7 for capital. You're paying 5 times 10 is, a half of 10. So you're paying 5 on the deposits. So you're paying 12, you're making 35. So you're still making a very nice return.
Okay. So right now it sounds like...
And it's totally safe. These are bonds that are government bonds that are not going anywhere. You know they're going to get paid because the state would have to go out of business not to pay them.
So let me get this right. So you've got a state-owned bank buying state bonds, right? State bonds. Bonds from the same state. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, maybe you could buy corporate bonds.
Okay,
but
so
of those big corporations that you absolutely know are not going bankrupt.
Okay, but here what it basically sounds like is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you make this argument for public banking, you're basically saying, look, banking done right is profitable. Let's just give the government a bank so it can make some money. But it's more than that, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, there are many other things you want to do with this bank. You want to partner with the local banks and help the mortgage situation. I'm just saying you could set it up, just to prove what you can do with the thing. Set up a model and show how profitable this can be and how very safe. We want to get into the same game that what Wall Street has been ripping us off with.
Right.
We could save all of that money, get the parasite off our backs. We can do it ourselves. It's not that complicated, except for all those rules barriers we put in our own way.
So what other things? Sorry, go ahead.
Once people realize that they're being ripped off by Wall Street and that we can get around those. We made the rules. Our politicians made the rules. They can change them. But the problem is the politicians generally got elected by Wall Street. That's the way our system works. And so you've got to get around all that. That's why it's slow going. But I think with increased awareness of what's going on, I think it'll happen. What
other benefits does a public bank bring to a city or state? What are the things that city or state can do with a public bank that they can't do without a public bank?
Mm-hmm. Well, they can do their own infrastructure very cheaply, save 50% on infrastructure. They can the bank can partner with local banks to make cheap loans to for students.
So this would be if the government decided, as a matter of policy, that it wanted to encourage investment in a certain direction, right? Then they could facilitate that.
In North Dakota, they particularly support farming, energy, and students. Those are things that they decided that they're going to support. So they make 1% loans to build schools, for example. Whereas in California, in Orange County, they're paying up to 15 times principal by the time they pay off these capital appreciation bonds over 40 years that they get from Goldman Sachs or from the big Wall Street banks. So we are paying through the nose for these things that you can get for 1% in North Dakota.
And that 1%, just again, I want to be clear. On the one hand, it's a lower rate because the public bank can set the rate at which it loans. But also, if it's publicly owned, the profits from that loan anyway go from the public back to the public, right?
Yeah,
so in
exactly.
A way...
So basically you get to borrow at the rate that a bank can borrow at. You, the state, get to borrow at the rate that a bank can borrow at, which is very cheap.
Right, rather than having to go to Wall Street and, as you say, pay these huge financing fees, huge over time.
Right.
Yeah. Now, what would you say, though, to conservatives or kind of free market folks who would go, that just sounds like a nightmare. I don't want to make it easier for the government to be able to pick and choose sectors, winners and losers. That kind of distortion of the free market always ends up bad. Always, increases inefficiencies. Maybe that gives politicians more power precisely because they haven't got to go to Wall Street and make the case.
There's nothing to stop you from going to a private bank if you want to get a private loan, but they're just making it serving sectors that are in serious need right now. We know that housing there's a huge shortage of housing for low and middle income people. Students have these debts that are going to break the country. I mean, we're going to have it's going to either be student debt or auto debt. One of these huge debts is going the way of subprime mortgages in 10 years ago.
Okay. With just a few minutes left in this segment, we've got about 3 minutes left. Where does most of the political support for this come from? Because the flavor of that argument is certainly more left-wing. Do you find you make more headway, on the left side of houses and senates? Do you get a lot of resistance from the right, or do you have basically, do you deploy successfully the more fiscally conservative arguments that you can bring to bear on this?
I personally don't. I mean, I've had people write to me and say, "I know you must be a Republican, and therefore I'm doing what." Well, in truth,
that's interesting.
I'm like you. I'm right in the middle. I'm not really political, but I think the strongest resistance we get is actually from the gold bugs. I'm not sure why that is. I think it's sort of like we're stepping on their turf or something, because they have a totally different system. It's like, no, you can't let the banks create money. It's got to be gold. It's got to be a hard asset, which obviously didn't work. We've been on the gold standard for hundreds of years, and we had a very unstable economy with, I think I read that in the 19th century there was a crash on average every 9 years through the 19th century.
I know a lot of my listeners would probably disagree with that take on gold. There probably are quite a few gold bugs listening. Not all of them by any means, but I bet there are a few. But the interesting thing about that, it's kind of strange to me, because as you rightly said, this creating money out of nothing is about 97-98% of our money is created out of nothing by the banks, by Wall Street, by the very people that our governments go to borrow, for these infrastructure projects, whatever it is they want to do. So in being against a public bank, I don't think any gold bugs would be really in that stance being for hard money or being against this kind of fake money that some of them would call it, that we get made by the private banks. It just seems like an odd battle to fight. Because I could see from a gold bug... I'm also a gold bug in the sense that I definitely think gold's a good, except for the fact that it's so heavily manipulated. But, yes,
I own some gold. I'm not at all opposed to that form of investment. But I just don't think we can go back to a gold standard. That's the reason we got off it in the first place, was that it didn't work. Yeah. Look what happened in 1933. Yeah.
It just seems like if I was a gold bug, I would be railing against our current modern monetary system, of which those Wall Street banks that we want to give less money to under your idea are creating all this money. That just seems interesting to me. So okay, we're going into the break, the last break. We've just got a few seconds. I will just say again, this whole modern monetary system, the creation of money, I do have a chapter in my book, If You Can Keep It, about this. If you can keep it, why we nearly lost it and how we get it back. So if you love this kind of stuff as I do, please check out that book. We're going into the break. We'll be back soon. So we're coming to the end of the show, and at the end of the last segment, I plugged my book, which was a little cheeky, considering all the books that my guest Ellen Brown has actually written. And the one on this issue, one that I actually own, is called The Public Bank Solution, From Austerity to Prosperity. So check that out. That's Ellen Brown, The Public Bank Solution. Ellen, the last couple of minutes of the show, we live in politically interesting times. Do you feel that these times, and our new administration, House and Senate and all that, how do you feel they augur for public banking? Do you think are we going to see more public banks in the next few years?
I'm very hopeful with this new administration, because everything is changing. And, we've been stuck in an old system for at least 30 years, that the current theory that banks only lend existing money. The monetarist theory has dominated banking, right. And you can't really break through that. But President Trump is talking about ending the Fed or auditing the Fed, talking about all sorts of radical changes. So you've got to break a few eggs. It's when everything gets torn down that you have the opportunity to build it back up. So I'm really screwing around and trying to get ideas out there.
That's as you said that, I just remembered I wrote an article when Trump was on the campaign trail called "Donald Trump Was Right on the Money." Literally. And he actually said something about the creation of money that I have not heard from any politician in the United States in the 12 years I've been here. And I was not a Trump supporter. So it pained me to say, you have just heard more truth from Trump on the campaign trail. And I've questioned his ability to speak the truth on many other things, but more truth from Trump on the campaign trail about the creation of money than I've heard from any other politician. And I was so shocked by it that I actually wrote an article that's still there on the Huffington Post. So do check that out, because it goes to some of what we spoke about here. And I do believe it's critical for Americans to understand actually how money is created. And the teaser...
I wrote an article on that too.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of the show. Thank you, Ellen Brown, for being on the show with me. Thank you, listeners, for being with me, and come back next week.
Revolutionary talk for revolutionary times. Promoting peace, liberty, and prosperity around the clock. libertytalk.fm.